Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
I mean, Mid-South is really, it's where I started. I mean, Mid-South was, I guess I would say that my career started about the same time that Mid-South was starting, because I know that I had completed my junior year of college, and Dick Murdoch, who I had known since I was very young, his father and my father were friends, and he had come to Mid-South and had said to me, he said, look, he said, if you want to find out if you really want to do this, why don't you come down here and work for the summer? I had spent the previous summer in and around the Amarillo wrestling territory as a referee, and so I thought it was a great idea. And so Dick talked to Bill Watts, and at the time Bill Watts and Leroy McGurk were partners. Bill had come in and I had taken part ownership in I guess Leroy's original territory, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, and you may know this better than I do, but Leroy's original territory was basically Oklahoma and Arkansas, and then Bill came in and expanded it, and then it included Louisiana and Mississippi, and then by the time that I left here, by the time that Bill sold Mid-South to Crockett, he would encompassed part of East Texas. I mean, they had bought out Paul Bosch and were running Houston, so it had become a very big territory. But again, I came to Mid-South in the summer of 1975. I believe it was late May or very early June. I got off a plane in Shreveport, and I had my first television match with Danny Hodge, and I'll never forget it because I was scared to death. I mean, I knew Danny Hodge by reputation, that he was a great shooter and everything, and of course I'm here, even though I was a big guy, and Danny never was a very big guy. I know that he could do whatever he wanted to with me out there, but it was easy. It was it's like he was very kind. It was just one of those guys. Hey kid, just listen to me and we'll be okay. And so I had my first TV match with Danny Hodge, and I think I made my first appearance in a what we would call a live event today in the Monroe Civic Center in Monroe, Louisiana. And that's where I got started.
What was it like working with Danny? Because he would be very different than what modern day wrestling became.
Well, yeah, I mean, working with Danny, it was like, well, again, wrestling then and modern day wrestling are different. So much more attention today has been put on the big moves, and it's like I used to say, we called a high spot. That's why we call it a high spot, because it was a place in the match where you got off the mat and you did something exciting, and then you went back to a hold. Wrestling, old school, if you want to call it old school, pro wrestling old school, was just that. It was more about the wrestling contest, and so it was more on the mat. It was more about that story and engaging people and getting them to get into what you were doing, and so yeah, you wouldn't get in a match with Danny Hodge or any of those old school guys and be just flying all over the ring all the time. And I think one of the guys that and I know that I've talked to him about it, and he kind of takes credit for it a little bit. He said brain dead this morning. Harley Race. Harley said that he was one of the first guys that started doing more. In other words, using the ropes more, and back in the early days. Gosh, when I go back and I find somebody actually sent me an old tape of my dad, and when I watched that tape, it was like I couldn't believe it because it was just, to me it was so slow. It was like, oh my gosh, they're not doing anything. But that's the way it was back then.
Sure, sure.
And yeah, by contrast, today it's the day as I try to influence my boys and all of these other young guys that are getting in the business, and so are the guys at the training facility in Tampa, Florida for the WWE. They keep telling these kids, look, it's not about all that stuff you're doing. It's about when you do it. It's about telling the story. It's not about. It's kind of like they think, well, to have a great match, you got to go out and do all this high flying stuff, and that's what impresses everybody. I said, no. What engages people in your match and gets you over as a personality is how you tell the story. Make them believe in you, and it's like I always use Rey Mysterio. I said, here's a guy who, the WWE has always been known as being the big man's territory. You got to be Vince has always loved bigger than life guys, and here's Rey Mysterio making phenomenal money, and he's one of the top talent. And how is that? Well, because Ray took what he could do, and he has learned how to do it in such a way that people believe it. In other words, the way he does a match and incorporates the things that he can do. It's not that he, like I told Ray, I met Ray. Actually, I met him at WCW in I don't know, it was 90, somewhere between 96 and 99, and he was with what they called the Luchadors. And between you and me, I hated the Luchadors. I mean, to me, it was like the flying circus. Okay, those guys are going to go out there and they're going to fly around the ring like a bunch of trapeze artists, and none of it makes any sense at all. It's just an aerial show. And at the end, then somebody covers somebody, 1, 2, 3. Ray learned how to work. Ray learned how to go out there and tell a story and build a story and show here's how a guy half the size of somebody else can work around and make you believe that he can take down the big guy. And again, it gets back to being able to tell the story.
So, Ted, in the mid-1970s, your dad, of course, was in the business, but who told you that this telling the story part of the business was so important? From day one. I grew up in the business when it was still very well protected. I'll be honest with you, my dad died in the ring in July of 1969, and my dad never told me about the business. He knew that I knew, but he and I never spoke and had a conversation. I was only 15 when he died. And, he knew that I knew because I had gotten it from my older brother. And my dad wasn't very happy about that. Not because, it was just that's the way things were then. They protected the business, and it was like, when you're old enough to know and you need to know, then I'll fill you in on everything. But other than that, he protected the business even around us. Obviously, he knew we weren't idiots, but again, you just don't ask those questions. So the business was protected. And when you got in the business, when you were brought into the business, and back then there were no schools. If you wanted to be a wrestler, the only way you could get into wrestling back then was to be befriended by somebody that was in the business who was willing to and liked you well enough to bring you in and thought you could contribute. And then, it wasn't like you went to some school and you spent 6 weeks or 8 weeks and you learned all of the stuff. No, they took you in a gym, man, and they'd show you the basics. Here are the basic holes. Here are the basic moves. Okay, kid. And then when you started wrestling, you'd start off in some podunk town. You'd be the guy in the first match, and you'd be in there with somebody who could lead you around virtually by your nose and tell you everything to do. So back then, as far as I'm concerned, nobody ever told me it's about the story. It was understood. It's kind of like, I can still remember watching matches between some of the greatest matches I saw, even to this day. Wrestling contests. When I was in college, and in West Texas and would go to the Amarillo Sports Arena on Thursday night, I can still remember watching guys like Harley Race and Terry Funk. I think some of the greatest matches that I ever saw were between Dory Funk Jr. and Jack Briscoe. I mean, in terms of telling an unbelievable wrestling contest story, I mean, today, would that work? Probably not. But if the people gave it long enough, in other words, I do believe, it's kind of like somebody said, well, you can't do an hour anymore. People wouldn't sit there long enough. I said, yes, they will. I said, you might have them, saying, in the first 15 minutes or so, they might be saying, hey, boring, do something, get off your can. But once you engage them long enough and they see the story you're telling, I think they'd get into it, and they would follow it, and they'd be right with you right till the end, because it's just like going to a good motion picture. What's wrong with motion pictures today? It's the same thing. I mean, I love to go to the movies, but the really good movies are so few and far between anymore.
Yes, sure.
I mean, it's like I go to movies now, and tomorrow, next week, I go, God, what was that movie about? I don't remember because it didn't grab me. It was a lot of action, and there's a lot of really cool visual effects and all that stuff, but big deal. What's the meat of the story? What story are you trying to tell me? And it's the same thing with wrestling today. And in defense of wrestling today, I would say that what the WWE and Vince McMahon has had to do, I've heard him. I was sitting in meetings with him as when I was part of the creative team, saying, "Look," he said, when we became this big, he said, I didn't realize, this was going to happen. And he says, but it has happened, and now we have to deal with it. He understands that when all the small territories disappeared, so did the breeding ground. So now we have to do the best we can to develop new talent, because the way you used to learn this business was to go do it. It's like you're serving an apprenticeship. It's like somebody takes you under wing and says, "Okay, kid, I'm going to help you get in the business," it's just like Dick Murdoch calls Bill Watts and says, "Hey, I remember Mike Dibiase, and of course Bill had good memories of my dad, and I remember he told me a story about my dad and him, and what an upright guy my dad was." And he says, "Yeah, I'll give that kid a break." And so Bill brings me in, knowing I know nothing, just right out of college, and he starts me. And that's how you did it. And I worked every little town. But, I know all the little towns between Houma, Louisiana, all the way to Tulsa, Oklahoma. I did them all. But that's how you did it. And each night, the way you learn wrestling is to get in the ring in front of a live crowd and do it, and engage those people.
Ted, what was it like way back then after your first few matches, first few months? You finish off in the ring, you come back to the dressing room. Did you look for somebody to give you a grade on how you did, or were you so tired? What's it like for a new guy in the business back then after the match?
Well, I'll be honest with you. When you were young in the business, it was kind of like, if you're young, especially if you're young in the business and young in years. I mean, there are some guys that got in the business when they were older, but the bottom line is, if you're the new kid on the block, you sit up and shut up. You sit down and you shut up. It's like, speak when you're spoken to, and it's yes sir or no sir. And things were a little different for me, I guess, because I was somebody who was more readily accepted because I was already part of the family. My dad had sacrificed the ultimate sacrifice. He died doing it, and the other thing was that my dad had a great reputation, and everybody liked my dad. They respected him not only as a wrestler but as a man, and that's what gave me a break. Now, again, I had to earn my own respect, just like everybody does, but it was more readily made available to me, and I guess if there's any break that I would have over anybody else, that would be it. And so, but yeah, and it's like I've instructed my boys. You know, my son Ted, who's now becoming a star in the WWE. I said, you watch the guys that are the money makers. Watch them every day. Go to them. Ask them questions. You know, ask them to watch your matches. You know, and I said, you know what? Those guys, they want. I always wanted to hear that. You know, it's like, you know, I want to know that you aren't here for a free ride. I want to know that you're here because you are passionate about this business. And you want to know all about it that you can. And so that's what I would do. I would always ask Dick or Dick Murdoch, Killer Carl Cox. Those were two guys that were. There was a guy named Bob Sweetan who was a great heel in my day, in my early days, and that I ended up working with a lot. Buck Robley, you know Buck Robley. You know, when you look at Buck Robley, I mean, you know, Buck had that horrible car accident, you know, and Buck was, I mean, in bodily appearance, you know, compared to today, you know, like, how'd that guy ever become? But Buck was a great psychologist in the ring and a great booker. And so I would watch those guys, and those are the guys, and I said, and I would go to something else that wasn't required when you were brand new. You know, if you're not one of the main guys, if you're the guy jerking the curtain, well, there's no reason for you to be at TV for television interviews, you know, the promos, what we call promos, because you're not going to be cutting any. But I went anyway. I went every Wednesday morning to the TV station in Shreveport, and I would sit there and I would watch these guys cut their promos because I knew what the programs were. I knew who was wrestling who. I knew where they were in the midst of that story, like, you know, the week, what they had done the previous night or the previous week, and where they were going. And I would listen to how they presented the promo and how, you know, and that's how you learn. And so, you know, I'm there, and then one day, hey, you know, somebody's not there or whatever, and I remember Bill Watts said, hey, you know, Teddy, you know, go up there and cut a 30-second or whatever it was, minute promo for da-da-da-da. So that's how I started.
Yeah, and it was always a shock in the old days when someone who had never cut a promo but had been in the territory, finally you see them on TV. There they are, their first shot at a promo.
Right.
Better make it good, right?
That's right. Absolutely right. Here's your opportunity, you know, and so again, it was something that I understood maybe instinctively from being very young was, you know, make it real. It's kind of like I told my boys. I said the one thing, because I had this respect for the business, because I had actually, you know, had the playground fights over wrestling, because, you know, you're a kid growing up, your dad's a wrestler. That phony wrestling. Phony? Yeah, well, bang, bang, bang. You think that's phony? You know? You know, I still remember some guy that came over to my apartment when I was in college, you know, and here he is in my apartment drinking my beer, you know, and then telling me wrestling's phony. You know, I said, really? I said, well, for example, you know, and I said, so I guess you don't believe there's a sleeper hold. And he goes, yeah, right. Yeah, you can put me to sleep. I said, turn around. And I put him in a real sleeper, which, as, I don't know, you know, anybody that's really educated understands. A sleeper hold, what we call a sleeper hold, is it's what police use to put a guy down, you know, when he's struggling with them. And it what it does is it cuts the blood flow off to your brain, basically long enough to just like make you faint. And that's what I did. You know, I put him out and I just dropped him on my kitchen floor, and then I woke him up. I mean, it was like, you know, I did that all my life.
That'll get somebody's attention, I think.
Yeah, and so when when I started wrestling, and because of my respect for my trade, and you know what we called kayfabe and protect the business, the uttermost thing on my mind was protecting the business. And so what I would say to myself each night was, for sure, what I'm going to do is I'm not going to do anything out here that anybody could see through. In other words, if I don't have the confidence to do it right and make it look real, I'm not going to do it. But whatever I do, they're going to believe. In other words, my attitude was, they might think that the 2 matches or the 3 matches before me were phony, but they're gonna walk away from my match and they're gonna go, those two guys were going for it. And so as long as I kept that in mind, as long as I kept that attitude, it again, it's make it real. It's like selling. And it's funny that my son Brett, I shared this with him, and my son is in the developmental program down in Tampa. And I said, Brett, I said, try this on, son. I said, you make them all believe. I said, when you're selling, I want you. I said, you sell it to where you get. I said, here's what I want you to try to do. I want you to be able, you have your match, whatever, and when you walk out of the ring and you walk back through the curtain in the back, I want you to have fooled Dusty Rhodes and Steve Kern. And he did it. He did it. And he said, I had guys coming up to me and going, oh my gosh, get the trainer over here. He's hurt. And that's it. And he understood it. I said, I get it, Dad. I get it. And I said, that's just it. I said, if you had Dusty and Steve and the guys in the back believing that you really hurt your knee, what do you think those people at ringside thought? And that's just it. It's about making it real.
Ted, did the fans in the 70s see? I was a fan in the 70s, and I knew that wrestling wasn't real. But do you think they knew it was the job to make them think it was real, or was the job to make them suspend belief?
Both. I think for some it was both. It was, yeah. Well, it's just I always use the analogy of the movies. Like when you and I go to we know a movie's not real. My gosh, it's not real. But when the actors, why is Sean Connery or whoever the guy is, why is Russell Crowe the lead actor in this movie? It's like one of the movies that I loved was Gladiator. What a babyface Russell Crowe was in Gladiator, and what a heel Joaquin Phoenix was as the Emperor. It's like, here's a guy, I go, boy, what a chicken shit prick, this guy is. And, excuse me for using that vernacular, but, that's emotion. That's the emotion you would use, like, oh gosh, well, it's the same thing. You sit down in a movie for 2 hours and it's suspended disbelief.
So, in Louisiana, you're in the ring. Do you think to yourself that these fans believe this is real because maybe the geographic part of the United States it is? We've heard that down south the people believed it more, let's say, than the people. I lived in Connecticut, in the East Coast. Do you think that had anything to do with it?
I don't know. I think people are people wherever you go. It's kind of like that old deal. Well, these people down here, and it could, and some of those, it's kind of like, you get into some of those back, way back in the bayou, they might not, they might believe it. And to me, there were always people, there have always been people who want to believe it. They just want to believe it.
Yeah.
And you can't tell them it's not real. But then there are those who just love it for what it is. But by the same token, it's kind of like, how do I say it? It's like, okay, that, anybody that's been in a real fight or been in a real competitive sport and good at it can watch wrestling for 5 minutes and go, wait a minute. Now, that guy just grabbed this guy by the hair of his head and ran him all the way across the ring. I said, nobody's going to grab me and run me anywhere by my hair. He might pull my hair out.
Yeah.
So you start seeing things and going, no, wait a minute. He just punched that guy in the face 5 times. Why isn't he bleeding? Why aren't his knuckles cut up? But by the same token, if you present it, there's a difference in presenting it in a believable way, and then absolutely, I guess, how would you say it? It's like, don't insult my intelligence, I guess is the way you would put it. In other words, when you do things that are so outrageous, oh, come on, you think I'm an idiot? I'm a moron? So the more believable, again, it's just like that's the analogy I always make with my boys. Make it as real as you possibly can, because those people and especially today. I mean, Vince announced to the whole world, hey, like, we're sports entertainment. So what? We're good. We're going to entertain you. You're going to have a lot of fun. So what? You go to movies, don't you? Okay, come on. And so the more real that you can make it out there, the more engaged those people are going to be for that time. Because it gets right down to, people, well, it's like right now. We're at a time in our country where, people have, they don't want to use the word, but I believe we're in a depression. And it's, people are losing their jobs and things are getting worse. Wrestling's thriving. Motion pictures are still doing very well. You know why? Because people, even in their hardest of times, they got to have an escape. They got to have somewhere where they can go and blow off steam. They got to have somewhere they can go and maybe forget about the troubles of the day. So even though they have very little money, they'll save their money, and instead of, I hate to say it, but instead of buying something they need, they'll go to the ball game. They'll go to the movie, or they'll go to wrestling matches. And then the baby face in that match, they put themselves in that guy. It's the American way. It's like they see that guy. He's getting beat up, but he won't give up. He won't give up, no matter what happens to him. He will not give up, and they are pulling for that guy to fight back and to come back from as far as he's gone down and fight his way all the way back to the top. And they put themselves in there in their life, and that's what we do. I mean, when you go to a football game, it's the American way. It's like, I remember what was the Super Bowl when the Giants played the Patriots. The Patriots, the only second team in NFL history to go undefeated. Everybody said, no way, no way. The New York Giants came in the back door. They were a wild card team, and it's like, they barely won. It was like, man, how did these guys even get here? And I watched that game, and to this day, it is the best, most entertaining football game at a Super Bowl I've ever watched. Because when they hung on, man, I still remember that one catch the guy made where he caught the ball and he was holding on the ball and it was stuck to the back of his helmet. You know the one I'm talking about?
Oh yeah, that'll live forever. Sure,
that'll live forever.
Yeah.
And here you and I are talking about it, and I remember like it was yesterday because it captivated me. It brought me in. It's like, yes. And when they won, oh my gosh! I get goosebumps thinking about it now. Sure. Well, that's just it. That's what you try to do with wrestling.
Well, you were talking about depression, and think back to boxing. Joe Louis, one of the most famous heavyweight champions of all time. When did he fight? He fought in the 1930s, right during the Depression. So people, no matter how bad things are, people will still put their dollars into things like wrestling to escape.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's again, for reasons that are, it's kind of like. I grew up in the business. My dad didn't really want me to wrestle, and not because he didn't love the business, but because he knew what came along with the lifestyle. Because of the high divorce rate and the people that have fallen into, the different, back in his day, it wasn't so much drugs, but it was alcohol, and you put in a lot of time, and you can make a good living, kid, but save your money. What are you going to do when it's over? Type of thing. And of course he died before he could stop me from doing it, and I did it. And of course, once I had done it long enough, even though I loved the business very much, I said, you know what, it's good enough for me, but this is not good enough for my kids. But the industry has changed so much in that aspect for the good that it's unbelievable. I went to the Cauliflower Alley Club this year for the first time, and I really enjoyed it. I saw some guys I hadn't seen in a long time, but the one thing that some of these guys, not all of them, but a few of them, it's like they are stuck in the old days. They are stuck in the old school, and all they want to do is knock Vince McMahon, and they want to knock modern wrestling. And I go, let me tell you something, pal. I said, my kid works 4 days a week, and he's going to be a millionaire. He goes home 3 days every week. He has a life at home. He has a trainer and a doctor at every event. not only that, he's doing a movie. He's going to make a commercial, and in probably 5 years' time is going to make more money than I made in my career. I said, so you're knocking the WWE and what it is today? I said, they're filled, say what you want to, I mean, you see, here's my thing. Everything, I'm a preacher today, and I tell people this in church. I go, look, this is what happens in the church. We get stuck in a way. We get stuck in this rut, like this is the way that things have always been done. In other words, by gosh, if those songs aren't in the old Baptist hymnal, then they're not godly. What do you mean you're going to have drums and an acoustic guitar at church? That's not holy. Boy, if it's not that old pipe organ music, I mean, come on. Everything changes. Everything evolves. And because wrestling has been able to evolve, not only evolve, but change, I mean, yeah, do I think that there are some things missing? Yes. But, you can't knock success. And I'm going to tell you something. If Vince McMahon hadn't done what he's done, I still think wrestling would be around, but I don't think that, I think that it would be languishing like it is. Like, you look what happened to wrestling in Japan. You follow me?
Absolutely. So
there's nobody. I mean,
so
wrestling was huge. Wrestling was like, oh my gosh, when I was wrestling in Japan, I was, until the WWF gave me the big break, I had become Stan Hansen's tag team partner, and I could have finished out my career there and done fabulously. I mean, oh my gosh, it was huge.
Yeah.
Now you got all these little bitty wrestling. You got nobody that's got the creative genius of a Vince McMahon, and it's dying. And there, look at all the other things. Like look at everything else that wrestling has to compete with today that we didn't have to compete with. 20 years ago, 30 years ago. I tell you what, if you think that you could, wrestling wouldn't be on television. Wrestling would not be on television. And if it were, it would be on some podunk station at 2:00 in the morning, because look at what it has to compete with today. If Vince McMahon didn't, hey, here's a guy. Not only is he on television, he's number one in his time slot every week. So, and again, but back to the difference in the business then and the business now. Yeah, I'm old school. I believe in the old. It's kind of like football. Football has changed too, but the fundamentals of football are still blocking and tackling. It's all about blocking and tackling and catching the ball and kicking the ball, and if you don't have the core fundamentals, then ultimately, you might be a flash in the pan, but you're not going to be great, and be one that endures for a long time. And the same is true in wrestling. Wrestling is still about telling the story, and it's kind of like I told my son Teddy when he went up. I said, you talk about all these gimmicks. Wrestling, everybody's got to have a gimmick. You got to, what kind of character are you going to be? I said, Teddy, what is Shawn Michaels' gimmick? And he thought for a minute. He said, well, Dad, he didn't really have a gimmick. They call him the Heartbreak Kid. I go, okay, what is Randy Orton's gimmick? And he thought again. He said, well, Dad, he doesn't really have a gimmick either. He's got a tagline, the Legend Killer. I said, what is Triple H's gimmick? And I just, the ones that, I said, what was Eddie Guerrero's gimmick? I said, the one guy that's doing really good, Rey Mysterio, what's Rey's gimmick? Well, Rey's gimmick's the mask. But, he's not like, I said, the bottom line is all these guys aren't gimmicks. They're not, they have a personality, yes. But what they are they're good workers. They're the people today that can still go out in that ring and engage you and pull you in and make you either want to love them or hate them. And that's what it's all about.
Ted, I think from a fan's point of view, what makes it good for your son makes it not so good for the hardcore fans. I think the fans used to enjoy all the different territories, the new faces. Now, because that doesn't exist anymore, Vince has to protect the guys that he has. and therefore it's better for your son. Does that make sense?
Oh, yes. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I think that's where you see a lot of people complaining. Now, a lot of the wrestlers I've interviewed from the 60s and 70s and even into the 80s, you're right. They are obsessed to some extent with Vince.
Yeah.
You'll be talking about something that happened in 1982, and then they'll start complaining about Vince. And maybe that's just a bit of a jealousy in that your sons makes the money that they make versus what guys were paid so many years ago.
Right.
What do you think?
Well, I mean, I'll be honest with you. It's just like, one of the, I lost a little respect for this guy. There's somebody, I mean, I admire him. He's a stand-up guy. He says what he believes, but he's one of these. He's bitter. Bruno Sammartino is bitter, and I don't know if it's because Bruno. Who knows? Maybe Bruno thought there was never going to be anybody as big as Bruno. But he's been obsessed with the kid. He calls him the kid, Vince Jr., for years. He I mean, when I went there in '79 or what, '79 was it '79 when I went there? Yeah, '79.
Yeah.
When I went there in '79, he didn't care about the kid, because the kid was going to change things. I know the story. I mean, Vince went to all the promoters of all the territories when he decided to make his move. You know that, don't you? He went to all the promoters and said, "Look, I'd like you to be a part of what I'm doing. But if you're, and he said, I'd like you to be a part of what we're going to do."
Are you sure about this?
I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
I mean,
because I hear a lot of different stories about
yeah,
this.
Well, but basically, my take on it was, and the way I heard it was, he went to everybody and gave them an opportunity to be a part of what he was doing, but he said, whether you are or not, I'm coming.
Yeah.
I'm coming anyway. And of course, I don't know what.
Ted, you were talking about Bruno, and I agree he's bitter, and sometimes the guys have reason to be bitter.
Yeah.
I don't know if he necessarily does. Do you think it bothers Vince that Bruno has this attitude of so negative towards the current product? Wrestling has never been a perfect sport, dating back to when I first started watching in 1971. So,
no.
Sometimes I think there's a little bit of hypocrisy there in that he took part in a lot of things that might not have been the most family oriented himself.
Yeah, I mean, come on. Wait a minute. Family oriented. I mean, okay. Look, when I was growing up in wrestling and wrestling up until the point that Vince did what he did. I mean, I was one of the, when I first sat down and talked to Vince, I was very honest with him. I said, Vince, I said, I came up, old school with my dad and everything, and when I first saw what you were doing, I was cussing you. And he started laughing. I said, I thought you were killing our business. And he said, but I figured it out. I said, I'm sorry, but I was wrong. I said, it's a stroke of genius. I said, what you've done is you've taken something, because wrestling was pretty blue collar, man. I mean, okay, let's go back to the early 50s. It's one of the first things on television. Then it had kind of a glamorous aspect to it. Okay? When my mom was a lady wrestler, I mean, she got treated like a movie star early on. But then, everybody kind of figured wrestling out, and then that went away. That glamorous 50s things, it disappeared. Okay, well then, all the wrestling that I remember from when I was able to remember, 61 to 69, when my dad died, in that 10-year period, it was pretty much, in my opinion, a blue-collar crowd form of entertainment. I saw a lot of smoke-filled arenas, and I didn't see doctors and lawyers and upper-middle-class people sitting at ringside. You follow me?
Sure, because wrestling had failed on a national basis. It had been overexposed.
Absolutely.
And instead of shutting down, it went back to the regional areas. That's where the territories were formed. Mm-hmm. And there was no national TV. And it wasn't anything fancy. And like you said, it was very blue-collar.
Exactly. And so it wasn't somebody you were going to take. It wasn't a place where if you were, unless you were, and again, blue-collar. In other words, rough crowd.
Right.
You weren't, it was, that's how it was looked upon, and that's the crowd you saw. And that's why when my dad would ever take us to the wrestling matches, which wasn't very often, because especially when he was a heel, and he would set us back there somewhere close to the heel dressing room, and he always told us, he said, if anything happens and the people start getting up and excited, he said, you go straight in that room right there. I can still remember the speech. And I said, but what Vince did was he took something like that, he dressed it up, he cleaned it up. Rock and Wrestling, the cartoons, he animated the characters and targeted the family. That's what Vince McMahon did. And that's when everybody initially, and I was one out of them, until I realized what he was doing. Oh, you're killing the business. But then I said, wait a minute. I remember because I was respected, for a long time for being a technical wrestler and da-da-da-da-da, and Dave Meltzer loved me. And then I went to the WWF, and he said, I can't believe, Ted, why did you go to the WWF? I said, Dave, what am I in this business to do? I'm in this business to make money. And there is no place, I'm reading the handwriting on the wall, buddy. I said, guess what? I saw it coming. When I picked up the newspaper the day after WrestleMania 3 and saw world attendance record, I said, that's where I got to go, because he's the man. And I saw it coming. I tell you who else I went to and spoke to about it, Terry Funk. Terry Funk predicted, I can remember when I was in college still, I wasn't even in the business yet, and I remember making a trip with Terry Funk, and Terry Funk said, Teddy, he said, you know what's going to happen one day, this is going to, he said, I don't know who's going to do it, I don't know how it's going to happen, but he says, one day, he says, wrestling's going to end up just like the rock and roll is today. He says, you guys, guys will be doing world tours, and they'll be on national television again, they'll be going all over the place. And that's exactly what happened. And when I remember calling Terry and telling him when Vince approached me about doing this thing, he said, if Vince McMahon has an idea for you, he says, pack your bag and go there and don't look back. He says that's the best place to be. And I went. And again, it's like, what are you going to do? You going to hang on to and what I did with the character, I said, okay. And that's funny, because here I am, I think of myself as a wrestler, and, I'm a guy, I said, okay, but Vince I was one guy, Vince gave me a character. I'm actually a guy who, he put in a costume, the suit, the $1 Million Man, and gave me a name other than just Ted Dibiase. But when I got in the ring, it's like I cut my interviews, I did the boisterous laugh, I did the over-the-top animation, which is what it became. Hulk Hogan, the whole deal. But when I got in that ring and took off the uniform, I wrestled like I always did. I continued to tell that story and try to make them hate my guts, because that was my job.
Yeah, and I remember that about you, is that you were totally gimmicked out with the $1 Million Man persona, and then you'd get in the ring and it was old Ted DiBiase again. Mm-hmm. It was good.
And that's it. That's what I'm telling my boys. I said, yeah, you gotta, charisma's something that you can't teach. You either have it or you don't. You can develop it more, but if you have it or you don't. I'll give you another example. Did you ever know, you know who Gene Kiniski was?
Yes.
Did you ever know Kelly?
Son, yes.
Kelly's a great guy. He is a great guy, man, and he was a friend of mine. And, he started in the business, and I can remember I would watch Kelly have a match. And I'd watch his match, and the story, I could see the story he was trying to tell. I guess fundamentally he didn't do anything wrong. But he had no character. He was just blah. Plain, and I could tell he wasn't going to make it. Another kid who, up until just recently, Davey Boy Smith's son, Harry. You talk about a kid. Now this kid can shoot. He is a great wrestler. But I was worried about Harry. I said, because I don't see any personality. And then they turned him heel. And all of a sudden, this kid's got some character. And I said, that's it. I said, you're a heel, buddy. And so I see an opportunity for him. But again, you look through the annals of our business, and it's all about projecting character. It's all about having personality, and a personality that the people are either going to love or hate. And when you can connect with them that way, you got it. And you, Junkyard Dog. When I first turned heel down here, I can remember I said, it was my idea. I remember, Ernie Ladd, God rest his soul. Ernie came to me and he said, Ted, at the time, me and Junkyard Dog were the two baby faces. It was Salt and Pepper, the black guy and the white guy. And we were good friends, and I used to tease Dog. I said, this ain't right, man. I said, I'm going out there working 20, 30, 40 minutes a night. And I said, you're going out there shaking your butt, howling at the moon. 10 minutes later, the match is over, and you're making more money than me. And he would laugh. And so Paul Orndorff had left and gone to New York. And the Samoans had gone back to New York. And Jake the Snake had gone to New York, and it was like, hey, we need a heel. And I remember knocking on Ernie's door one night, and I said, Ernie, I found your heel. And he goes, who? I said, you're looking at him. And his eyes got big as saucers. And he pointed at me, started shaking his finger with a big smile on his face. He said, you rascal, you. He says, I never thought of that. He says, but that's great. Nobody ever thought that I would turn on my buddy, JYD. I mean, for as long as the people knew me in Mid-South, they had watched me grow up. They watched me from a young guy become a main event guy, and now I was betraying them. And but it was the greatest move I ever made. But once I made that move, I remember calling Terry Funk and I said, Terry, I got to work with JYD. I said, he can't do anything. Terry laughed. He said, Teddy, he said, what you're going to have to learn is how to work around him. He says, you're going to have to create all the excitement. Basically, you're going to have to put Dog in the middle of the ring, and you bounce off of him. And that's what I learned to do. And I learned to utilize what Dog did best. But see, the thing about JYD was he wasn't a great wrestler, but he was great on that microphone, buddy. He endeared the people. He had so much character, and that's just it. That's what our business is about. It's still about projecting that character, and I was there. I don't know if you saw the night that I introduced my son on the show. But the first night that Teddy was ever on Raw, it's kind of like, and I told him long before he made that first appearance, I said, you know what, son, you never get a second chance to make a first impression. I said, you got to make it right. And I'm sure he was thinking about that, and I introduced him, and man, he had the people that first night because he did it right. I mean, it was like the one thing I knew about my son, I knew he was a good athlete. I knew that he could do what was needed to be done physically. What I didn't know, and you don't ever know until it's tested, is does he have the intangible? Does he have the charisma? And obviously he does. I mean, my gosh, Vince has told me since, he said Ted has the most unbelievable future ahead of him. And many guys that are still there have said to me, it's not really been said, but it's pretty much understood that Vince is grooming Teddy to be the next guy, the guy. So,
what's that feel like for you? I mean, that must,
phenomenal.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I couldn't be prouder. I mean, and tonight, Raw is normally a live show, but because the guys went to Australia, they did a live one and they taped one. Well, I'm the guest general manager tonight on the show that they taped, and so I was there last week, and I can see what Vince is doing. It's kind of like now for, I don't know how, this thing with the legacy, the storyline. Legacy is, it's Randy Orton, it's Cody Rhodes, it's Ted DiBiase, it's, they're all second and third generation wrestlers, and everybody says, gosh, when are they going to let Teddy break out? All he is Randy Orton's, goon. And I go, yeah. And I said, that's probably by design. And so when you watch the show tonight, it's funny how I tell you what, Vince is really good. It's like I walk out and because I've been around a long time, they haven't seen me forever. I mean, the people will go crazy, yay, oh my gosh, and Vince has got me carrying the $1 million belt, and and then I start down the ramp and I stop and I turn around and I motion to the back, and out come Cody and Teddy, and then they go from yay to boo.
Yeah.
They love him, they hate him, and
Sure.
then we get in there and we get to going, and basically, again, unexpected. Now that I put him over, and then I end up having Cody wrestle. Who's the guy? Mark Henry, and then I end up making Teddy wrestle Randy Orton. And I tell him on the show, I go, yeah, I know you. I said you called Randy out at the Bash, and I said, I know you guys kissed and made up, so to speak. I said, but I saw something in your eye, an awakening. And what you have awakened to the fact of what everybody else already knows. This guy's just holding you down. You're as good or better than he is. And I said, he's just using you. And I said, tonight you're going to wrestle him.
Sure.
Anyway, so I see where they're going with it. But again, it's telling the story.
As a dad, and seeing your son on the verge of really making it big and big money, big success, movies. Are you nervous when you see him in a major match that he could get? How's that feel from a dad's point of view that he could get injured?
Well, because I was there. Because I was there, I don't think about that much. I mean, I always know it's possible. What I have told him to do, and here's what's funny, is the match that if you watch the show tonight that he has with Orton, they did a spot on the floor where they do that spot now where they'll fling a guy into the stairs and and he hit it pretty good, and so by the time he got to the back, he couldn't lift his shoulder up. Well, I was concerned about his shoulder, and then we iced it all the next. I spent the day with him on Tuesday, and we iced his shoulder all day, and he had motion, but not and so because he was so concerned by the time before they left that they had an X-ray. The X-ray was okay, so there's no major damage, but he has a severe contusion. And I told him, I said, son, I said, look, I know what you were thinking. It's your first time to ever wrestle Randy, and they're testing the waters. Because I know right now, personally, I know they see big money there down the road. And they're testing the waters, and they're planting a seed. I said, but, in the future, and I know that's not a huge spot to do, but I mean, no, right now, you're concerned about your shoulder. You're fixing to go on a foreign tour. And those foreign tours, or they're making big money on those foreign tours now. And I said, now what if you really had hurt your shoulder and you to where you couldn't go and work? I said, you got to pick your spots to do the dangerous stuff or the questionable stuff. I said, Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 2 years ago jumped off a 30-foot ladder onto Vince McMahon, who was in a trash can on a table. Neither one of them got hurt. I said, but Shawn, probably made $500,000 for that match. I said, if you're going to do it when it's for the money. I said, and I've told him, and my youngest son is down in Tampa training. Brett, he's on the developmental program. And he's been here lately, the last couple of weeks, been telling me, gosh, Dad, my back's been bothering me, and, I've got this. I said, you have sciatica. I said, I said, but you have they have a chiropractor down there that they can go see for free. I said, if I knew I could go to a chiropractor free of charge, I'd have gone twice a week. I said,
sure.
Your body is your most precious commodity, because without it, you're not making a living. So take care of it. I said, that's number one. And so yeah, you worry, but you don't. I mean, it's kind of like you just know that it comes with the territory, and you know that Yeah, sometime and sooner or later. That the other thing I cautioned him about is kind of like I told him the old Brett Favre story. I said, Brett Favre came out of Southern Miss and ended up being this quarterback we'll all remember. I said, but you know what his daddy told him when he first signed in the NFL? He said when he first signed in the NFL, Brett was living in a double wide trailer, and he said his daddy told him, "You keep living in that trailer," and she says, "Stay there for the next 4 years." He said, "What?" He said, "Stay there for the next 4 years and save your money." He said, "If you do that, you won't ever have to worry, and everything you buy, you'll buy, and pay for it when you buy it. You won't pay for it in credit." And so I've tried. My son is building a house, but he's not building a mansion. He's building a very resellable home, and and probably in a couple of years he can pay it off. So he's taken that advice too. But it's amazing. It's amazing that I can, that I'm telling my kid. I said, look, if you play this thing right, John and my son have become buddies. And I tell you what, John is not the greatest worker, but he's got a lot of character, and he's got a lot of personal character. Something else that Vince has awakened to in the conversation that he had with me about my son, here's what he said to me. He said, "Ted," "you should be very proud of Teddy because he has an unbelievable future ahead of him." He paused for a second. He said, "But I want you to know what I admire most about him is his character, his personal character." And I told Randy Orton a couple of years ago when I was there, I said, "Randy," I said, "do you know that you are the most gifted athlete that this company has right now? You're the best worker, but you're not in the top slot." And I said, "That's because you can't keep both your oars in the water." And I said, "You get that figured out." And I said, "The world's yours, buddy." And now he got married, he had a kid, he settled down, and he came back and actually told me. He said, "You know what? Thanks for the conversation that we had because I get it." Well, that's just it. Vince doesn't want to worry anymore about, if I'm going to invest my money in this guy, I don't want to be afraid of getting a phone call in the middle of the night that he's tore up a hotel room or that he's been busted for steroids or whatever else. No, he doesn't need any more Chris Benoit stories. And so, he understands it's not all about just talent now. It's about the quality of people that he's got.
Ted, for you, do you watch the pay-per-views at home, or do you have the opportunity because your son's involved to actually travel to them?
I watch them at home.
You do? Okay.
Yeah.
A lot of excitement before.
Oh gosh! It was me. I was in the business and everything, and well, yeah. I mean, it's like I'll be honest with you. Because I'm not there all the time now. I mean, when I was away from when I stopped, when I got into the ministry, there was a few years there where I didn't watch. I didn't watch because I'd gone on with my life. I was doing something else, and I'm very passionate about what I do now. But I'll always love the business, and but I didn't watch. And I started watching again right before I went back to work for him. But now that my son is there, I mean, I look forward to every Monday night. It's like here's what's really funny. This past weekend, my wife and I went by Blockbuster and I rented the John Cena's movie 12 Rounds, and so I plugged the movie in yesterday. And the how there's always previews before they actually show you the feature. Well, the first preview was for Wolverine, and the second preview was Teddy's trailer for the Marine 2. And I said, "Melanie, it's our son."
Can't
I was
believe
like,
it. Yeah.
"Oh my God!" I mean, it was so. I mean, my wife and I, she looked over at me and she said, "We did that. we created that kid right there." I mean, it's like it is surreal to see my son in a movie trailer. And am I proud? Absolutely. And again, I'm his dad, so I also try to temper what's going on in his life and remind him on a regular basis what's really important.
and not to screw it up, which is so easy to do as
yeah.
a young man with so much success.
But I'll tell you what, though, if you know my son, I'll tell you how, it's like he's been very, very, very strong in his faith in God from a very young age. And then, so he went down there in Tampa and everything. And so the one night he goes out and he gets all, so my younger son told me this. He said, Dad, Teddy's okay when he's drinking beer. He says, you put him on that hard stuff and he becomes Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And so they went out somewhere. So, I get a phone call at 7 o'clock in the morning from a reporter from the Tampa Tribune. Oh, do you have any statement about your son's DUI? I went, what? And but I'm just letting you know how my son responded. By the time I went to the gym, I did some things, blew off some steam. I was mad. In the meantime, he called home. I get home, and my wife. I said, "Well, what did he have to say?" And she said, "Well, I couldn't understand him through the tears." And I said, "Well, that's good. That means, he feels really bad about it." And that's a relationship that we have with our son. I mean, he is extremely disappointed when he knows he's disappointed us. And then Steve Kern, who's a very good friend of mine as well. And I don't think that they could have anybody better running their program, because Steve's a guy who came right out of Florida and was trained by Eddie Graham. And Eddie Graham is respected by everybody in our business as one of the greatest minds the business ever had. And Steve's a good trainer. But anyway, Steve's also like me as a Christian. He called me, and he said, Ted, he said, despite the bad news, he says, I think you'll like this. He said, when Teddy got out, he had to come straight to a show, and he said he asked me if he could address everybody. And he said, he said the first thing he did was he went to everybody in every one of them, everybody individually, and apologized to them. Then he addressed the entire group, and he said this. He said, I've apologized to you, but as a group, I want to apologize again to the WWE and to Steve and to all of you for misrepresenting this company. And he said, but more than that, I've misrepresented the God I serve. And he said, so I'm just putting everybody on notice that I haven't been living up to the principles I've been taught. And he said, that all ends today. And I was like, wow. And I was more proud of that than anything.
Yeah, that'll make you feel good, huh?
And I said, that's awesome. And so he, once they put him on, and once he got on the roster, he's moved back here and he's married his high school sweetheart, and he's doing good. And I'm smart enough to understand that things happen. I remember. It's kind of like, and Teddy knows. I said, Ted, I preach to you from experience, and I said, the idea is that fathers pass along to their sons information to help keep them from making some of the mistakes they made, and I know you're going to make your own mistakes. I said, but here's an opportunity in your life, and some opportunities, they come along and they go. And this is one. If you blow this, you may never get a second opportunity at it. I said, if I was in your position right now and getting ready to have the world laid at your feet, I would say, why do I need to drink at all? And it's like, have a beer here and there. I said, but other than that, forget it. And again, as a minister, I told him, I said, here's the deal. You have a relationship with God, and you've had that relationship. Here's a kid who, after the tsunami hit over there in Sri Lanka, he went with a group of college students over there and spent 2 weeks building houses for people who had nothing. That's the kind of heart my kid has. And he came home and told me about it. He said, Dad, we built houses for people that we wouldn't use for a doghouse. It really impacted him. I mean, it made him realize how much more we have than so many people in the world. So, and there's other stories I could tell you about him where that's concerned. I said, you know, it's funny. I said, Teddy, I said, fame and money do weird things to people. And I said, here's what I believe. I believe that God has given you incredible favor. And I said, but you have to understand as a Christian that the purpose of the favor He's given you is not so that you can become rich and famous. The ultimate purpose for it is that you would use that fame and, to some degree, that fortune to make people aware of Him as a Christian. And I said, as long as you'll keep that in sight, as long as you don't forget that, as long as you give God what is His. And I said, there are incredible stories about that. The one story I cited to him was, you're familiar with Chick-fil-A, right?
Yeah, sure.
Well, the guy who owns Chick-fil-A, who started Chick-fil-A in Atlanta, is a very strong Christian. And I don't know if you know this, but Chick-fil-A is not open on Sunday.
Right, I know.
It's never been open on Sunday, and the reason it's not open on Sunday is this is the way this man honors God. That Sunday is the Sabbath. But if you understand how much money the guy's made, you know, it's incredible.
That part I never knew. I drive by it sometimes on Sunday out here in Arizona, and it's always come like, but you just filled me in.
Yeah. The reason it's not open on Sunday is that, you know, he honors the Sabbath or Sunday because of his faith in God. But if you know the whole story, I mean, the fortune this guy's made, and then what he does, he gives so much of his wealth back into what we call the kingdom, or supporting Christian missionaries and what have you. It's like there's a verse in the Bible about, there's a lot about tithing, but basically, I told my son, I said, you cannot outgive God. And I said, it's not that you give to God because you expect all this to come back to you, and it's not all about money either. I mean, you know, sometimes that, you know, it's not about money. It's about your health. It's about the health and well-being of your children. It's about everything else in your life. You know, God will prosper you. Belief, and you can't ever outgive Him. But as long as you give God what's His, and as long as you keep Him number one in your life, I said, this prosperity will continue. That's basically what I told him, and you know, he's really making me proud.
Ted, I'd like to talk to you about the ministries. Do we have time today, or would you like
Sure.
to do it?
Okay, well, can you hold for 1 second?
Yeah, let's pause for a bit. I got to do something. 3 minutes?
Sure. I'll tell you what. My son was just trying to call me, my younger son, so I'm going to hang up and call me back.
I'll call you back.
Okay.
Fair enough.